to myself again. But it's the only...
Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters. We've got, it's a bit like, I don't know whether this is like Sesame Street with the two guys, or the Muppets where there's the two guys in the box. But Mitch and Stu sitting together tonight. Steve Hasty, who was supposed to be there to make up the threesome, but obviously is now self-isolating, I think, and stuck in his house. And we've got That's George and his dog that's barking with the fireworks. But tonight is retro night. It's all about West Ham. Another show where we talk about Newcastle United's games past and some of the games which are a little bit more nearer the present. And we'll look back on the memories. We're also going to have our regular sections where we talk about players that played for both Newcastle and West Ham. We'll get the lads to put their team together of former Newcastle and West Ham players. And we also look at some famous fans from West Ham United. So, as always, we're going to start with George, who keeps telling us he might have to disappear depending on what his dog's like. So, George, if you want to unmute yourself and give us your first recollections of games between Newcastle United and West Ham.
Well, I take you back to a 60-61 season, because it's the only season when I've actually seen the home game against West Ham, and I also later in the year saw the away game as well, by accident than choice. And the home game was something, well, it was brilliantly, because it was we'd played them off the park first half, 4-0 half time, 5-0 just after half time, final score 5-5. It was absolute disaster. And the whole top and bottom of it was a young goalkeeper, Bert Garrow. And just after the start of the second half, he made a missed kick and it went straight to a West Ham player, and I'd given them their first goal. And then every time he got the ball after that, the ball was hot. He just couldn't get rid of it quick enough. Well, of course, goalkeepers in 60-61 didn't get the protection they get now. So West Ham were giving them a really hard time. So one by one, the goals went in. Hurst, Bonds, all the names you can think of were banging them in. Of course, Hursty was just a young kid then. And it was an absolute disaster. Was it not a very good season? I mean, the crowd was just 20,000 in 100, I think, something like that. It wasn't very good. So it was an abysmal match for Newcastle in that sense. Exciting from the goals point of view. From a personal point of view, I was just starting to hope about recovering from a knee injury I'd got. And, I never recovered from it, and I still got the knee injury. But there was a lot of there after a junior match at Nuns Moor, and went down to the St James's. And of course, because there was nobody in the crowd, they let we all go into the paddock at the in front of the big stand. But it was a disaster, absolute disaster. However, 2 goals for Len White, 1 for Bobby Mitchell, 1 for Bobby McGuigan. I'm trying to think who the 5th one was. Just have a cheat a little bit. Albert Scanlon. Albert Scanlon, the Busby babe we bought late in his career, Minton bought late in his career. As I say, not a very good match in terms of result and how we played. Now we roll on to April, and I go to London with my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law, I've got to be careful now because a lot of these people are still alive. My brother-in-law met this London girl at Whitley Bay. She was on her holidays. And he fell madly in love. Now, I'm not sure what he fell madly in love with, but something kept him at Whitley Bay nearly every night for about a fortnight. And eventually, and not too long afterwards, he suddenly announced at home that he was getting engaged, much to the chagrin of me future mother-in-law and father-in-law. The girl was quite a bit older than he was, but he was determined he was going to get engaged. So the weekend was set. And it just happened to be the weekend when we were playing West Ham. And the girl lived in Lewisham. Well, half her family were Hammers and half her family were Millwall fans. So the real football fans. And so we went down overnight in this little Bedford minibus. Now Marjorie's laughing because she's starting to remember. Eight of us in this little thing. Had a gear shift, so 3 could sit in the front row. And I did most of the driving for obvious reasons. And off we went. So we had a good day. And then on the Saturday, they said, right, the girls are going shopping in London. We are going to the West Ham game. Then after the West Ham game, we're going to a club. And then we'll all meet back here and have a drinks party back at the house. So we could go to the match. And we didn't play too badly. The Hammers were expecting to give her a hiding because we weren't playing very well then. In fact, we were heading to the bottom of the league. And we played quite well. And Albert Scanlon scored again and put us in the lead. And we're in the lead for ages and ages and ages. Then all of a sudden, they got an equaliser, which satisfied them. So the match was over 1-1. It was quite a good game. And off we went to this club. Until 9 o'clock, it was a drinks club. Then at 10 o'clock, it became a casino. And then at 11 o'clock, a little orchestra appeared and they started to play very familiar music like da 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 da. So you know what sort of club it was turning into, don't you? And well, we eventually got taxis back to the house to start the drinks party, by which time it was nearly midnight. But when we got there, noticeable by their absence were Marjorie's parents. They'd gone. Apparently, Mum had said to them about 11:30, look, I could do with a lot. And somebody had hired her a pillow and a blanket and pointed to a settee, which is not something you do to my mother-in-law at any time. and poor soul, she just said to my father-in-law, Jim, hotel, and off they went. Well, because by the time we got there, the atmosphere was, you could cut it with a knife. The real party was going to be the next day in a hall nearby. And there was some sort of shindig at that, and the party never got started. And I was ordered to drive the minibus home, and everybody came home. And we left him in London with his new fiancée. It didn't last very long, but it made the football hardly interesting at all. But it was a very good weekend. Lots of things I'd never seen before, I can tell you. Probably won't see again. But that's my memories of West Ham to kick you off, lads.
Well, Keith Rose says, evening all, an NUFC retro show is never complete without one of George's stories about his brother-in-law. There's definitely a book in him, George. I'm not sure he'd be happy about it, but what a belter. Steve.
He would.
Steve Hasty, good evening, mate. I'm so sorry that you're still stuck there, mate. It looks like you're in the airport. It looks like you're sitting in the airport or in one of them toilets on the planes.
I thought that's what I would do. I thought I'd set it up so that it looked like I was really in a cell. I look like I've been kidnapped. I was on my way and I got kidnapped, and I've got the PLO who are like sort of hovering around us, or something like that. Actually, I feel like that at the minute. I can't even take a dog for a walk unless it's dark, in case one of the snooty neighbours spots us. Man, it's ridiculous. I'll not tell you how many calls I've had from Track and Trace. I know where the 18 billion's gone. It's gone on phone calls to me, I can tell you that. and I think I know what. I'll just remind George, the attraction of Whitley Bay in those days, George, was, I think it was known as the Big Dipper and the Ghost Train. I think those were the two big attractions at Whitley Bay.
Is that what they called it in those days?
There was nothing else at Whitley Bay. Football. My recollections of West Ham, it's quite strange because as a Wallsend lad, I was born in Wallsend and went to school in Wallsend as a youngster, right the way up till 11. And obviously when like sort of the mid-60s, you were like sort of just coming up, 5, 6 year old, you were into football, and you had the World Cup, and obviously West Ham was like the team that everybody talked about simply because of Moore, Peters and Hurst, because of the World Cup. And obviously, that was on everybody's lips. And I remember quite a lot of the lads at school had the maroon kit, the West Ham kit. I think I had one myself. And I think it was just one of those things your parents bought you because it was linked with the England, and there wasn't England shirts out. But a lot of lads also were there was a big connection in Wallsend with Burnley as well, because there was a lot of scouts used to come to the junior football in Wallsend. The boys' club, I remember having lots of good connections with Burnley at the time. So there was kind of always an interest in West Ham. And I think that interest sort of really pushed itself when Pop Robson left Newcastle. And I remember one particular match of the day in the early 70s where, you always thought when you saw your own club, in those days, there was only ever 2 games on match of the day. So you didn't see your own club very much. And this particular game was West Ham. And of course, of all the games, it was a game where Pop Robson turned us over, and I remember my dad going, it was years after he'd left, and my dad going, should never assault them, he was a great player, him. And that was because that was, he had barely seen Pop Robson in a kit since the sort of Fairs Cup days as well, So that's my early recollection. In terms of games, to tell you the truth, I cannot remember in going back. I think it's because West Ham were a very similar club to Newcastle in so much as their support, the way they were in the league. It seemed to be one of those teams where we would beat them at our place and they would beat us at their place. And it just seemed to be, both teams cancelling each other out all the time. And neither team really sort of pushed themselves, So I don't really have a first inkling of a game that I can remember, to be perfectly honest, Steve. Not as a youngster anyway.
Okay, well, I'll share mine before I come to the 2 Ronnies.
Yeah.
The game I remember is the first live TV game from St James's Park, and it was Newcastle United were rock bottom of the table, and we managed to win 4-0. It was in those the Halicon days of a player called Paul Goddard, who was a tremendous servant to the club at that time. Somebody who went on to break the goal scoring record at the time when Newcastle didn't potentially really have a very good team. Where star man at the time, of course, was Peter Beardsley, who sadly eventually ended up leaving the club to pay for the new stand. But that's the game that I remember. I do remember, of course, going down to the old West Ham ground. Of course, they now play in the Olympic Stadium, but their original ground was, of course, Upton Park, and had a bit of character about it. But by God, don't walk down there on a dark night. My first away game was with the supporters club, and I went with the bus that used to go from the Haymarket, and I was part of the Newcastle United supporters club, of course, which we've talked about before on the show as my old 1987, 1988 membership card, which I dug out the loft, and it's there we go. 1987 winners. Player of the year that year, Peter Jackson. Geordie player of the year was Neil MacDonald. Most improved player was Paul Gascoigne. Young player of the year was Darren Jackson. Most promising newcomer, whatever happened to him, was Kevin Casely. But the golden boot that year went to Paul Goddard. So hell of a season. He was a hell of a player. We were expected to go down, but we didn't. And it was really just that wonderful turnaround in that game, which really ignited the season. But Peter Beardsley was outstanding. One of the stories I've got from that is I used to stand in the corner or in the scoreboard, and I always used to stand at the front, down next to the fences. And I used to stand with a guy called Eric, Eric was an old guy. He had a bit of a stutter. He had a mustache. He always had one of the flat caps on, the grey one with a magpie on, but he always had his transistor radio by his ear. So the reason I stood down the front was, A, because I wanted to be down there and up there and be able to shout and swear at the players and, the visiting players and give a bit of encouragement to the lads. But I also wanted to hear the scoreline from Eric, who had his transistor radio. The problem was, whenever I used to ask Eric the scoreline, it was always a bit delayed because of his stutter. So everybody used to stand next to him, and he would take an age to get the scores out, especially when people wanted to know what the Sunderland score was. But anyway, one day I went down there with my pal John Bickerton, who I used to live in the same street with. John had his hands through the fence like that, like you often did when you stood down at the front. And what I remember about that game against West Ham wasn't just the scoreline and the wonderful day we had, but was the rasping shot by Peter Beardsley, which didn't hit the back of the net, sadly, but it did hit John's hands, which was through the fence. And basically, I've never seen anyone fall as quickly off a fence. And for the rest of the game, he had thumbs like Wolves bangers. His hands were ringing for the rest of the day. I can only imagine the throbbing he had, but Eric was okay. We did eventually get the score off Eric, but happy memories, great days. Scoreboard, the corner, the songs we used to sing between each place. The sign of the old, for those of a younger persuasion, there used to be a hot dog kiosk, which used to stand in the corner. Often that would get uprooted and passed around, much to the annoyance of the bloke with all these hot dogs and that flying all over the place. But yeah, happy memories. God, people used to piss in your pocket as well, or piss up against the back of your leg. Yeah, I mean, we look through rose-tinted glasses, but they were good old days. So that's my story. That's my first story. Mitch and Stu, good to see you together. Hope you're going to have a good night tonight. And I've just seen that bottle of Jägermeister, so I'm guaranteed you will. Who wants to go first? Have you got a running order yourselves?
I better go first because it's my turn to pour the drinks.
All right.
Just when we were talking about the first memories, I mentioned last week that West Ham were in a group with Chelsea, Sheffield Wednesday, Newcastle, always going up and down. And when I was living in Tenerife, there was a West Ham supporters club bar that I used to drink in all the time. There's one here in Dubai, and just down the road from where we are now. And one of our good friends, Les, he's a West Ham fan, so I always have a bet with him, Newcastle West Ham for 100 pounds, like 20 quid. But when I think of West Ham, I think of Ray Stewart, Jody Cotty, Billy Bonds, that sort of thing. But my first proper memory of West Ham was when we got beat 8-1 of them, listening to them on the radio when I was a young'un. And Alvin Martin scored a hat-trick against 3 different Newcastle goalkeepers. And one of them was Peter Beardsley. So that was my first time with West Ham. I can speak about other games, but I want to do it later. And it's over to him.
Yes. I can recall memories of that 8-1 because I was listening to it on radio as well. Listening to the goalkeepers change, and I think Gaza was in goal at one point as well.
Chris Hedworth. Martin Thomas. Chris Hedworth. Right, Martin Thomas, Chris Hedworth, and then Peter Beardsley.
Which is total mess. But the game that sticks in my mind is for a very personal reason. Was the 97 game when Barnes scored the winner down at the Boleyn ground. And the reason for that was I was doing my Royal College of Surgeons exams, and the exams were being held in the Hotel Russell in Russell Square. And it happened to be the same day that we played West Ham. And I went down the night before, got to the Hotel Russell and tried to check in because I just booked myself into the hotel because that's where the exam was being held. And there'd been a big mix-up with bookings, and I ended up in a suite with a jacuzzi, which was fabulous. And that night, the night before the exam, I think ITV had some sort of boxing on. I've got a feeling it was Oscar De La Hoya or something like that. And I did the Alan Partridge. I was in the jacuzzi with the mirror angled so I could see the television with the boxing on. Cleaned out the minibar. Then got up the next day to go to do the exam at 8 a.m. And we were playing West Ham that day. And I made arrangements. I think I met a lot of lads. I think I was in the Blind Beggar. I think you were there as well, Steve, at some stage. And so I went down and did the exam, and there was a written exam, and then there was a Viva Voce, an oral exam. Well, of course, I was set up for the day, so I went down in colours. And I'm sat there in a Newcastle shirt doing the exam, and then I turned up to the oral exam, and I get off the guy doing the exam, and I'm like, I'm really getting to do the exam, like. So I did the written exam, did the oral exam, and that was it. I was off. Dropped the bag at King's Cross, then jumped on the tube to get down to West Ham, expecting nothing because at that stage I think we had nothing going on up front. We had Tino fit and we had John Barnes fit, and that was about it. And the performance was immense. And it was, if anybody's seen the goal, Tino managed to keep Yeah, Timo managed to keep the ball. If you watch it, I would look at it on YouTube for the one with the Colombian commentary because it's fantastic. And Timo keeps the ball. He stands up, he falls down. He stands up, he falls down, then knocks it back at Barnes, and he hits this screamer with the outside of his left foot. And the keeper was never going to stop it, and everything went well. So it was a great day all round. Did an exam, watched the match, we won, went home, turned out I got a distinction as well, which was fabulous.
Brilliant. Good stuff, lads. Great stuff. Okay, George, back to you, mate. If your dog's quiet.
Yeah, well, just at the minute. What he's not telling you is that when he got into the Royal College of Surgeons, he was the youngest member of the Royal College in the world. In the world, not just in the UK, in the world. So they sought me and Marjorie out when he got his degree. To tell her that. She's back again, I'm afraid. I'll just
Steve,
let her out, Steve.
Back
and
to
I'll
you,
come
mate,
back.
whilst George goes and lets his dog out.
Yeah.
We're going.
There's We're going to ask Marjorie.
We're going live with Marjorie now. Are you coming on, Marjorie? Are you coming on, Marjorie? Well, Marjorie, we might as well have you on. Have you got any tales? Have you got any tales about George before he comes back?
Oh, I've got loads of things I could tell you about him. He won't tell you anything.
You got any tales? Any tales about your sister-in-law, right?
Oh, he was quick. George was quick to get back there.
Get the elbow in. Get the elbow.
I heard you teeing. I tell you, heard you teeing her up to spill the beans. I thought I better.
That elbow, that wasn't it?
Brilliant. Man. He was like Wayne Davies there, straight in, bam.
Andy Carroll, the works.
My next West Ham memory was not a good one because it was wasn't it against West Ham that some idiot threw bananas at one of the West Ham players. Was it Franz Carr, and Bobby Bonds was it? Well,
Bonds,
yeah, somebody in our crowd threw a bunch of bananas, which well, one of those things that lasts forever, isn't it? Even though it's a one-off, it's something that sticks with the club, whether you like it or not. And of course, we don't, but it's still even in those days. And it's not recent either, but still in those days, it was it didn't go down very well even with the home supporters. In fact, I heard afterwards that the person that did it got a right shellacking off the people he was with, but nonetheless, the act took place, and we've got to hold our hands up and say, thank God it's that sort of thing's calming down now. I calmed down altogether as far as St. James Park's concerned. But that was another memory I was going to raise, not a very good one, but a real one.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, Steve, on to you, mate.
Yeah. I was going to say, we forget West Ham had some smashing players in that time as well. We talk about the players that we've had, but I think we should, I look back at sort of good centre forwards. I mean, Clyde Best for me was a tremendous centre forward, a great servant for West Ham, and he was one of those sort of big, tough, argy-bargy, typical sort of centre forward of the 70s and early 80s who, really, really made a presence of himself. And I look at that they had slighter foot players like Alan Devonshire, who obviously made a name for himself with the FA Cup goals, but again a very, very decent footballer. As was obviously Trevor Brooken, and we'll forget that partnership that Brooken and Keegan had in England. And Brooken was one of those players who could play an entire game and come off and look like he'd never been on the pitch. His shirt was never dirty, his shorts were never dirty, he was never on the deck, and just had this, when partnerships build, when players suddenly play very well together and they develop a partnership, especially when it gets to international level, it just lasts and lasts. And I think if you look back at the '82 World Cup finals, we did okay in that, but it was the injuries to Brooken and to Keegan really that cost us the opportunity to move any further in that competition. And again, I mean, sometimes it's something that always happens at international level or with England when we get to championships and finals, that players suddenly get into a 22-man squad carrying injuries, you know, because the manager wants to keep that going. So that sort of, when you look back at their team and you look back at some of their players that turned up at St James's Park that we managed to see, you look back at them with awe, and you forget that, you know, top class players, and it's something that because I don't buy programs anymore, sometimes I miss out on. You know, you don't look at your program anymore and realize who the opposition are, because I tend to now go and concentrate on how my team's performing, and I don't pay much attention. But every now and again, I'll spot a performance by a player, or I'll look out for a performance by a player from one of the opposition, and admire them. For example, Man City, when Silva came, for example, that's a player that you know, that you just look at the way that he can play football. And West Ham did have some of those players, and they had that aura about them. But again, like I said earlier, I've always thought West Ham and Newcastle, the makeup of the team, the makeup of the club, and the fans themselves were very, very similar, very, very passionate, from a working class area, from an area in London and in the East End. And Newcastle, obviously, with they had the docks, we had the river, we had the shipyards, etc. And very, very much working class clubs that the fans feel as though that they own. And we're seeing that now even more so with West Ham, because of the hassle that they've had with the stadium, and the fact that they were moved on, and they have Gould and Sullivan and Brady trying to run the club in the manner that they want, which obviously a lot of fans are still angry about, in the way that we're angry about, ironically, about the way Mike Ashley runs Newcastle United. So connections all the way there, Steve.
Yeah, I think so, mate. It's an interesting fixture, West Ham. It always is. I would always, and I agree with you, that had some great players over the years. You know, I mean, you just need to look at the boys of '66, as you say. I mean, you know, you don't have to go far to see what talent they had in that team at the time. Keith makes a good point. Why were they West Ham and not called East Ham? Because they played in East Ham, which is, I suppose, it's a good enough. Why a West Ham fan on to tell us that would be handy, I suppose. Dave on Twitter, I will read his comment out. He says, "Hi, Steve. I remember this was my first match. I was away with my dad. I was 8 years old, 25th of August, 1974. A 2-1 win, as I remember. Toon fans stood up down the side ground, mixed in with their lot, and I can tell you it kicked off outside after the match when we were walking down the road." And I think most people will have that, most people will have that kind of experience back in those days. A lot of people, of course, mentioning the song and mentioning the petrol bomb incident, which is something which, you know, none of us would endorse, but obviously that's something which is, you know, really haunted the Newcastle United fans and you know, the West Ham fans, and, you know, not a nice situation. I know the guy eventually came out, gave an interview, and I think it was in Mick Edmondson's fanzine. Of course, we've got Mick on the show tomorrow night on the Three Amigos, but Mick actually knew the guy, and the guy did an interview for Mick's fanzine. But I think one of the lads mentioned that a little bit earlier. You know, it went on for many, many years. There was a lot of animosity, and you can read all about that in the books. It's in my book, NME from the Bender Squads to the Gremlins. But it's also in a lot of Cass Pennant's books, and a lot of the books which have been written by a lot of the West Ham hooligans, if that's your kind of thing. Mitch and Stu, over to you two guys again for your next set of stories.
I've got 2 away games, both in 1994, one in March, one in, I think it was September. The 1994, it was the 4-2 game, and I was there with Frankie, Darren Parker, who's been mentioned in a couple of stories. At the time, I was working for London Electricity, and I made some friends. One of them was a woman who lived in Stratford, which is near enough West Ham's ground. So we went down there for the weekend. Frankie was a bit nervous going to see West Ham, not surprising with that. But we ended up going there was a social club right near the ground, and we paid a couple of quid to get in. And never mind doing the accents, but we went upstairs. There was about 200 Newcastle fans there, and that's when we had the flag. You know, the very original flag, the black and white one with the star on. And that was getting passed about, and it was just all tune, black, white, all white. So then we took over that social club, and it was brilliant. And then at half time, we got the flag, well, not we, the flag got taken out again at half time. And when we were sitting behind the goal, the West Ham fans were above us. And they were very kind enough to sponsor our flag with coffee and tea and beer and coins and spits. You know, and it was very kind of them just to endorse the flag as it got passed along. But it was like a proper chicken run. I think it's Poplar Station, the tube station you got to walk to. It was like a right chicken run getting back there. So, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, it's one of those where it's happy days looking back. But let's say, you know, it's a bit different.
Yeah.
6 months later, as I said, I was working for London Electricity. I was working for the business, this connection team. And there's a bar next to West Ham's ground, only in Green, yeah, just off Green Street. Only maybe 3-minute walk from the Boleyn ground, Upton Park, whatever they want to call it. And I started speaking to this guy. He's on a football, white stand and all that, not the usual Cockney white boy sort of thing. So he had a massive bill. So I was trying to help him out. So I knocked a few hundred quid off his bill. And then I said, look, I'll put you on a power key, which is like where you put money in and then half the money comes off for the debt and another half kicks into your electricity. And you've done me a right good turn there, son. And he says, next time you're down, I'll give you a right good drink. I went shopping. I said, I'll be down right when the fixtures are out. And as that happened, we got West Ham away early on, and I was working in London at the time for that week. So I went to his bar beforehand, and he was like really busy, as you can imagine, with people before the game. He says, come after the game and I'll sort you out. So I went after the game. We won 3-1, and I won the bet, by the way. So we won 3-1, and I went after the game. Probably scored again. Both times we were there, he scored. But I went after the game, and I says, right to me, and I said, I've got my pal with this. I says, I got half price drinks, but buy one, get one free. He went, you've been wagged off, you go for monkey. And that was his story. No, he bugged us off. And I was like, all right, no problem. I said, well, I don't mind paying for it, you know. And I says, I can understand you lot from London haven't really got the money. So, no, we're very affluent up north. And I says, but I'll do you one favour. I says, let me go and see your meter. So I went up and I said, look, it's taken over too much. What you need to do with this power key, says it's a plastic key. If you put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, it'll give you an extra £5 worth of electricity. He went, you stay there. So he stayed there, put it in for 30 seconds, charged it, and it did give an extra £5. So I walked down and I said, you've got to give us a pint for that. All right, you can make another pint. But no more. And Frankie wasn't too keen to be hanging around at this stage. So we finished the pint and I said, but you put it in for 5 minutes, mate, it goes up to 50 quid. So I walked out and off we went. We ended up going to, I think it was a new nightclub up Tottenham called The Palace. We're up there. That's another story for definitely another video. But I got back to work on Monday. I think it was Sunday night I got back to Newcastle. But on the Monday I was into work. And this guy rang up because didn't have a mobile. He rang up the office demanding to speak to us. He went, my key's melted. And I says, what do you mean it's melted? He says, I put it in for 30 minutes like you said. I went, you've been mad enough. That was it. And let him go. So I sent a disconnectors round to cut his bar off to make sure that he wouldn't try and move the Geordies off again. It was just one of those little battles because obviously I really do like the West Ham fans, but there's bad in everyone. This guy was all clever and I really did him a good turn. And he threw it back at my face and I just thought, right, I'll get my own back, Geordie style. So thankfully I was out the way before he put the key back in the microwave for 5 minutes to get 50 quid. Oh, you Mr. Victor. Follow that one.
One of my other memories of West Ham is being on a bus from Wallsend going down, and we did the whole get there, get off, go down the chicken run, which wasn't pleasant, and then get back to the bus. And the police were giving it the hurry up for everybody to get back on the bus. And 3 or 4 lads on the bus had dived down the back alley to have a wee before they got back on the bus. And while they're down the alley, one of Metropolitan's finest comes round the corner and shouts down the alleyway, come on lads, move along. And a voice from down the alley goes, why, like, do you want one and all? So I had a panicked individual come and running up, Mitch, we've got to do something, we've got to do it. And I'm thinking, what can I do? And it was an hour and a half before we left because this individual from the Met really didn't have a funny bone in his body. Couldn't take the funny side of it, wanted to take names, wanted to give charges. And so from trying to hurry everybody onto the bus, we were an hour and a half late. And we were lucky to have any windows left back in the bus, just because some smart arse had said, why, like, you want one and all? In hindsight, when we were all sat in the service station halfway home, it was quite funny. But at the time, not at all. Bloody nightmare. But West Ham was always an interesting place to go because I think when push comes to shove, and particularly spending some time with the West Ham lads here in Nelson's down the road from where we are now, understanding there's actually more similarities between the two clubs than there are differences. And I think over time we've come to understand that. And we've come to understand even particularly, like you mentioned before, this ire they have with their owners, that they're genuinely not really happy with their new ground. They're genuinely not happy with the way the club's being run by their owners. And that sounds very familiar. Very familiar. And I think, unfortunately, that seems to be the way so many clubs are going at the moment, where you've got owners who have one idea and totally trash the culture of the club and don't understand the culture of the club that they're buying. And that's where I think out here in particular, particularly because we've got one mate Les who we know very well, and through him I know quite a lot of the lads who organise the West Ham stuff out here, and a lot of them are my patients actually now. You appreciate the similarities more than the differences, and I think that's something as football fans we should cling on to more often than not.
Great points, well made as always. Lots of points coming in. I'll put this one to you, George, because it's an era you were around at. What was your opinion of Pop Robson leaving Newcastle to sign for West Ham after he criticised Newcastle calling them an amateur club? George, I'll give that to you.
Well, in my opinion, it was a convenience for Pop Robson as far as I'm concerned. He saw a nice signing on fee and an opportunity to get hold of it. And the amateur club thing, I think it was a creation to make that happen, in my opinion. I don't think the club was squeaky clean either, because there were some rumours about where different people were treated. But I think he saw other people getting more than he was, and he saw the opportunity of a big payday. So he took the opportunity to take the big payday. That's
anybody wants to hear what Malcolm and John thought about that? They did actually talk about it last night on the show. We did a wonderful show last night, the Road to Wembley 74. It covered all the rounds and the final. Went on a little bit longer than we expected because Malcolm's internet dropped out for a while, but we were on for about 90 minutes last night. Great show. Find it on the channel. Just look for cup final runs under the playlist and you'll be able to watch that. And a big shout out, as always, to our sponsors. Newworkwear.com, specialists in the supply and branding of clothing for the workplace, and also a big shout out to John at qtechshop.co.uk, who makes pool tables, snooker tables, amongst other things, and also does the t-shirts, which are available to buy at newcastlelegends.com. Also does the t-shirts that we have been raising money for the food bank with over the last few weeks. We do have another one for tomorrow. A lot of people requesting another opportunity to bid and donate to the food bank, which is absolutely fantastic. So we'll be doing another one of those tomorrow. So I'll ask this question to you, Steve. Barry Hogan says, is there a West Ham player you would love to have seen us sign?
West Ham player I'd like to have seen. At the time, I would love to have seen them sign Clive Best. Like a player I mentioned very earlier in the programme. I always thought, like I said, that he was fantastic in the air. He was good on the ground and he was a great target man. And I thought that at that particular time he would have fitted in really well with Newcastle United. He was one player. I also thought Frank McAvenny was an absolutely tremendous footballer, and I thought that he, despite the many off-field problems that we used to hear about, I always thought that he was the sort of player that would have fitted in well, a bit like where Goddard fitted in well at Newcastle early doors. I thought that McAvenny was the sort of player that would have been an excellent sign for Newcastle back in the day. So probably those two players. I could probably go on and pick a few more, but yeah, I'll stick with those two. Perfectly honest. I mean, you mentioned somebody's put Frank Lampard up there. I think Frank Lampard, it reminds me of. He's one of those players. I know he went to Man City, and I know he went to America in the end of his career. But Lampard, for me, is one of those steeped in London footballers that there are an awful lot of. And you look round at Chelsea, and you look round at West Ham and Tottenham, and the players that will not move out of the M25. You know, it's one of those things that those players they're born there. They're bred there. They won't move there. We've been lucky that we've had players that have moved from London, like Rob Lee, for example. You know, who was you know, when we come on to talk about players who would have played for both clubs. But I think Lampard's one of those players that he probably would never have moved anywhere. You know, homeboy. You know, very much a man's boy. Be with a family and not want to be on his own, or certainly not want to be outside the M25 ring road.
Yeah, okay. Mark Byers has said that Mitch and Stu have swapped side. That's a schoolboy error. All the best double acts stick to the same side. Anton Deck, Morecambe and Wise, Bruce and Agnew. Mark, you make a valid point there, lads. You shouldn't swap, lads.
I'm just looking for which one's is the best side. That's what they're trying to work out.
I've been pouring the drinks all the time, so I said, right, it's your turn to pour the drinks. So he had to go to the fridge to get the monster for the Jägermeister.
I think somebody.
It looked through the bottom of a glass. It
looked like somebody spilled a drink there before. I'm not sure what was going on off camera there, but it looked like one. I thought so. You cannot waste good drink, lads. However, I think Mitch, because you've got the hair, I think you need to do that, and then I think Stu needs to go. That's it. Perfect.
That's another famous you've got them into.
Lauren and Hardy, brilliant.
Another famous you've got them into.
Okay, it is. You're not wrong there, George.
Steve, when people are talking about the similarities of the club, I'll tell you something I noticed in the university. Students very rarely wear their club colours, and the ones that do regularly are Hammers, like ours do. But the other London clubs, you wouldn't know they were there, but the Hammers you certainly do.
Yeah, you're right. Michael Carrick, good shout. Dave Havery, thanks for your comments. Paul Gray, good to see you, mate. Paul Gray used to play for me when I was managing Felon Football Club, and he actually scored the winner in a cup final against Dunstan Excelsior. So he's a footballing legend, good pal of mine. Frank McAvenny was a Steve signing for Felon. Yes, he came and played for Felon. He played one game for us, and he scored in a 4-1 defeat at the Duke of Albany in Washington. We've never seen him for months. And then he used to play with us on a 5-a-side at Northumbria Centre in Washington. Great guy, good pal of mine, Frank. Wish him all the best. Right, we're coming up to the last 15 minutes of the show. George is obviously going to put the dog out again, but as always, we do tend to find some celebrities. So we'll start with the celebrities before we finish off on our other recollections about Newcastle and West Ham. Famous celebrities who support West Ham, and don't shoot the messenger. This is what I've found on the internet. So some of these could be correct, some of them might not be. Here's your first one.
Glenn Hoddle.
I'm sure I've got you on this one. This was me banker that you wouldn't get. And if you get this, you'll get the rest.
Right, I'll put my specs on then.
Still none the
wiser.
Oh, there is.
That's somebody out East End, is it, Steve?
Well, Paul Oxley says Danny Dyer. No, it's not Danny Dyer. Oh, somebody in the chat's got it. Are you ready, lads?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt Damon.
What?
Glenn Hoddle keeps laughing at you. Jason Bourne says so. Yeah, well done there. Andy, well done, mate. No messages for that. That's a bit cruel, Andy. Liam Kennedy, I'm sure he'll not appreciate that. Okay. So the next one is
John Cleese.
John Cleese. Yeah.
Well done, George. John Cleese, of course, the Ministry of Silly Walks being put into good effect there. Another one, probably did the chicken run himself a few times.
Ray Winston.
Yeah.
Ray Winston, of course. Sexy Beast and Scum, amongst other brilliant films that he's done over the years.
That was 5-2, wasn't it? 5-2.
Dave Grohl, really?
Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl, West Ham fan, apparently. Yeah, apparently. Another one of those strange ones. He's probably been to one game in his life, and they've got him down as a West Ham fan on their West Ham on the West Ham fan site.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand, yeah, of course. Again, another one which I've left scratching my hands at. I think he has been to a few games, of course.
Yeah, yes.
Rod.
The man, we're looking for the man's name here.
All right. Not Brit. Rod.
Stewart.
Rod Stewart.
Brit.
Rod in a very snazzy number there.
Yeah. Called Brit Eklund.
Yeah, and with Brit Eklund. Yeah, it's an interesting photograph, that.
How can somebody with speedos like that get Brit Eklund?
It's never carry that, isn't it?
I shouldn't have asked that question.
Oh, Steve Hasty straight in there.
Yeah.
Steve Hasty's down with the kids. Didn't have to put his specs on for that, and he's got West Ham outfit on.
Certainly
and then you have to do a close up.
No, you didn't. Last one.
That's Kate.
Sophie Ellis.
No.
It's
Steve's. I think Steve's got it on the tip of his tongue.
I was going to say Kate Winslet, but it's not. It's I can't remember her name now.
I need Richard Whiteley's countdown clock on this show, like.
You do.
Boom.
Look, she was in one of those Love Actually films or something, wasn't she? She was there.
Yeah.
Oh, what's her name?
Oh, Stu's coming in with a late burst here.
I do know. He was a couple of minutes.
Keira Knightley.
Well done, Steve. Here, Steve. Back it in net.
Yeah.
As I expected, Matt Damon tricked you.
The Dave Grohl connection's probably from the guitarist out the Bayern Maiden. I bet you he's got him in there. He's a big. Yeah. He'll have got Dave Grohl into that. So Dave Grohl's probably never been to a game in his life, and he's just been told by is it Steve Scott? Oh, I can't remember his name.
Steve Harris.
Steve Harris, that's it. He'll have been told by Steve Harris all about him, you know.
Nialf Garnett, says Nicholas from Felon. No, mate. No. Not after the last few days I've had. I'm not putting Alf Garnett on. Dear me, how I'll get crucified as a bloody sympathiser, mate. So there's no chance of putting that on. Mark says proper giggle tonight show or a proper bubble, as the Hammers would say. Stu's congratulating you, Steve, on your Keira Knightley answer. So that's good. Let's go to the ground before we go to your teams, and I just want to ask everybody's views. I mean, I'm not sure if you've all been. I've been to both grounds. Even if you haven't, George, you'll have an opinion. Obviously, the new stadium was built like with the Olympics in mind. Has had a running pitch around it, etc. A place where obviously Mo Farah and the like did fantastic things for England, for Great Britain. But what's your take on that modern stadium compared to the old ground? Would you prefer to be at the old Upton Park?
I hate to generalise, but stadiums that were built like that with a track around for athletics are never successful football grounds. The struggle for atmosphere, in my opinion, because the action's too far away from the supporters. And compared to what they used to get at Upton Park and the other grounds that they had, they would get tons of supporters. When you see them on the telly now, they're struggling to get a lift from the supporters because the supporters are so far away. And that's my problem with a ground like that. The other problem I have is as a Newcastle fan, seeing that we've had to build ours brick by brick, getting it bloody cheap. That's another grouse I have. They're getting that at a peppercorn rent for what it's worth and donating about 6 million in the Tory party funds, well, I think that's a bit steep on the taxpayer and on football fans generally. But as a football stadium, I think stadiums like that very rarely work. Very rarely work.
Okay, good stuff. George, what about you, Steve? Are you a fan of the new stadium?
No, I agree entirely with George. I think it's a disaster of a stadium. A stadium that's built for athletics cannot be converted into a stadium for football. The whole pitch of the seats, everything about it, the distance that you've got, and the way that the stadium was purchased just makes the whole thing stick in my throat, quite frankly. I'm all for clubs like West Ham moving into better stadiums and having better facilities and for their supporters, but not at the cost of the taxpayer that we had to pay for that ground and then for giving it for free. And I'm sure if they had the choice of being able to convert whatever it's called, Open Park or the Boleyn ground into a more modern stadium on that facility, the fans would have preferred that, to be quite honest. And again, moving from a ground and sticking a ground somewhere where there's literally nothing, where you have to walk miles, all of that type of thing. Fans shouldn't have to put up with that, quite frankly, Steve. It's a disaster.
Yeah, okay. Stu and Mitch, what's your take on the new stadium?
I've never been to the new stadium, to be fair, but I loved Upton Park. It was a proper football stadium. There was a few of them in the time, and I like the way the fans were on top of the players. And just like when you talk about the Gallagher and the scoreboard, but the players responded to it. I was watching last night with Supermac and John Gibson when I learned something new, that there was a little pitch invasion before or during one of the games, and I didn't even know that. But the fans can affect games, not condoning pitch invasions, obviously, but at the same time, they knew they had to go and get a result, and they did it. And as George said, you're miles away. These plastic stadiums aren't good, and the plastic stadiums have created plastic fans, which to me has been a big problem with the English game for maybe 20 years now. So I did like Upton Park for all its downsides, getting in and getting out, especially getting out. It's an away fan. I did enjoy Upton Park.
Okay, what about you, Mitch?
Same thoughts. Upton Park was a proper football ground. The Boleyn ground at Upton Park was, the fans were on top of the pitch. You felt the atmosphere, you felt the positives, the negatives, the higher, all of that. And then when you go to a ground that isn't built for football, and you've just got to talk to the Munich fans. Go to Bayern Munich. They ended up in the Olympia Stadion, which was built for the Olympics, had a running track around it, and they shared it in 60. Now they're in the Alliance Arena, and the fans enjoy it more because it's a stadium built for football.
Not even that. Speak to the West Ham fans, and they'll tell you.
It's such a different thing. You talk to the lads here, the West Ham fans here, who obviously go to all as many games as they can. They don't like it. They're not comfortable here. It doesn't feel like home for many of them. We've had this discussion about St James's Park and do we move and where do we go if we need to extend and we can't use where we are, what do we do? The one thing we need is a purpose-built football ground. We don't need a mishmash for something that was built for athletics, which has a running track around it, which loses that intimacy. It's that connection that football fans want. Absolutely. You look at some of these grounds that were not built for football, they weren't designed for football, and they lose at least 25% of the atmosphere, if not more. The players should feel the fans on top of them. If you want a ground that is intimidating to come to, that is a fortress at home, you don't want one with a running track around. You just don't. And that's what they're left with. And I think that's why, yeah, they've got it on the cheap. They've got it in a really bad way. I've just seen the phrase "horrid, soulless place," and that's what a lot of these grounds are.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Lots of comments coming in. Been to both Upton Park, which was a dump, and I was at the new ground during the Olympics. It's a fantastic place, but definitely not for football, says Dave Harrison. James Brown describes it as a expensive gated stadium. John Melrose says it's even too big for a rock gig, never mind a game of football, and it's the wrong shape entirely. James chips back in with Upton Park was a proper ground with a proper atmosphere. John also says that the fact they held baseball there tells us it's never a football ground, which you know is true. Steve Bennett says it's good night from me and it's good night from him. See you tomorrow, guys. Yeah, good stuff. So let's get on to the team.
By the way,
I thought you would be. Nicholas says athletic grounds are a nightmare for ball boys and girls. You're not wrong. Okay, and Jeff says top class show again after the last few days. A light relief to hear you all talk football and then keep up the good work. Thanks, Jeff. Right, let's go for the players, lads. And as always, you know, there's players who played for both Newcastle and West Ham. And what we do is we go through a few. The lads guess them, guess from the pictures, and then what we do is we get them to name a good team. So here we go, lads. We'll start with a goalkeeper tonight.
Shaka
Hislop, of course, who played as part of Newcastle's entertainers team with Kevin Keegan.
Kieran Dyer.
Kieran Dyer, of course, the man who probably is better known for his exploits off the pitch rather than on. And, of course, his big fight with Lee Bowyer, of course. Here we go with this one.
Andy Carroll.
Andy Carroll, of course, who is currently at Newcastle United.
Stuart Pearce.
Yes.
Stuart Pearce didn't have his best of years, of course, at Newcastle, and again, probably best known for missing penalty for England. Guy on the right-hand side.
Rob Lee.
Well done, Steve. Yeah. Rob Lee. It wasn't the clearest of photographs, that one. That could have been a little bit of a trick for you.
Kitson.
Paul Kitson. Paul Kitson, of course. Quite an array of talent amongst these lads tonight.
Is that Barr?
Demba Barr, of course. Yes. Again, another good striker. So one more to go.
Les Ferdinand.
Yeah. So hopefully, I've given the guys a bit of food for thought. When they talk about their teams, I've got to. Before we finish, I do have to mention, but I'm not sure whether I put the photo up if anybody mentioned it. But there's Leon Best, of course. In one of our more recent games, of course, got a hat trick. Scoring as Newcastle scored 5 past West Ham. And another one, a guy who doesn't get any credit amongst fans for obvious reasons, but of course, someone else who scored against West Ham, and that was Michael Owen. Didn't score many goals. Scored a hat trick and a 4-2 win.
Front page of the Pink.
It was, mate. Yes, that was the last front page of the Pink, which I'm sure you've got, and I've definitely got one in the loft. No doubt about it.
I think the other one that we forget about was Gutierrez in the 2-0.
Yeah.
Sissoko goal was a fantastic header from a cross, but then the shot and the raw motion that when that ball hit the back of the net, and your mate John Carver standing on the touchline, absolutely going berserk when that ball went in the back of the net, if you remember. An occasion and the emotion that got to everybody in St James's Park for all the right reasons on that particular day as well, Steve.
Yeah, you're right, mate. You're right. Barry Hogan's gone in early. He's gone in early with his own team. So we'll give Barry the opportunity. We'll do this for people who like to watch and join in. So Barry's gone for Pavel Cernacek, Stuart Pearce, Glenn Roeder, player manager, Darren Peacock, Rob Lee, Nobby Solano, Scott Parker, Vic Keeble, Sir Les, Demba Ba, and Pop Robson. What a team. Very, 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 very good. Brilliant, mate.
That's not his team. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you what, with Keeble in that front row, there's nobody would get a headed ball, that's for sure.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so George, are you ready? I'll go with you first.
Well, what you've just put up would be mine with very few exception, I've got to say, because of the, as I say, the aerial threat from Keeble and all the rest of it. Pabs might not have had Roda as player manager and maybe chosen Keegan or somebody like that to manage the team. But that team is sure I'd be struggling to do anything different, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, good stuff, mate. Steve Hasty.
I had Pav in goal. And then when I looked at an abundance of riches, and given the manager, I thought I'd give him a bit of a problem. I'll come to the manager in a minute. So I thought I'd give him a problem. I thought I'd just pay two at the back. I thought I'd pay Stuart Pearce and Glenn Roder at the back. And I thought I'd stick two wide, if you want, in Dyer and Boyer. And I'd stick Scott Parker in the middle of them. And then I'd play Nolan and Solano in front of them, with Les Ferdinand leading the line. I'm just count. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, Les Ferdinand leading the centre line with Barr alongside him and Bellamy, just to create havoc. And I'd put Andy Carroll on the bench so he could play either centre half or centre forward if we needed him, and pray that we didn't have to. And obviously we all know who the manager's going to be. Because let's face it, he was probably for both clubs one of the most defensive, and everybody thinks he's an absolute dinosaur. And I've got a Big Sam just to see what a Big Sam could do anything with attacking formation like I've just given there, and an abundance of midfield riches, something that he's probably claimed he's never ever had.
Get off.
Brilliant. Okay, Steve. Excellent. Over to you, Stu and Mitch. Are you doing like a double or are you doing one each?
No, I'll go first because I need the toilet. And I had a team written down, but Mitch spilled the Jägermeister over it. Right now, is it? That's portable reliability, by the way. So I'll just have to go with Pav in goal. And I was struggling for defenders, and I swear I got up to play a few hours ago. And I said to Mitch, have you got team scoring? Yeah. I says, I couldn't get defenders. And he started reeling them all off.
That's unmuch.
Okay, I'll take them. So I've just rewrote it. I've got, because I had actually Andy Carroll as a centre half in my team, just to make up like 11. So I've got Glenn Roder, yes, and Wayne Quinn as a back three, with Nobby, Kevin Nolan, Robert Lee, and Kieran Dyer as a midfield, and the front three of Bellamy, Demba Ba, where we're going very soon to the Demba, and Sir Les Ferdinand. And the manager has to be Alan Pardew, because we're off to dance.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff.
I am going, excuse me, Mitch. I'll be back soon.
Go on, Mitch.
Great. My team is Shaka in goal, and then the back four, Solano at right back, and then Abdullah Faye and Glenn Roder at centre back, Stuart Pearce at left back, the midfield three, Rob Lee, Mo Diarmi and Kevin Nolan, and then the front three, Demba Ba, Andy Carroll, and Sarge Paul Goddard. And because I just couldn't put Pardew or Allardyce as manager, I'll give Glenn Roder as player manager.
Very good. Some great efforts there. And Barry Hogan, thanks for joining in, mate. That was really good of you. Really
It
good.
was good. It was great.
Good to see the people who watch the show getting involved as well. If you've enjoyed tonight's retro show, don't forget, as I say, we did a great road to Wembley with Super Mac and Gibbo last night. Last week I did one with Gibbo, just looking at the Fairs Cup. You can catch them both on the playlists. And from our perspective, we always launch the Three Amigos poster on a on a night, on one of these nights. So here we go. Are you ready, lads? Drum roll. We need a drum roll. Here we go. It's a dream of mine to be in Star Wars, Mitch and Steve. So there we go. Mitch, you'll be quite happy tonight. Your Han Solo. I've ended up.
I'll take Han Solo all day long, mate.
I've ended up with Ben Kenobi. Steve's got the good role there. Luke Skywalker. I think George. We might have made George. We could have made George Chewbacca, or the dog.
The dog.
There you go, Stu. That's it. Brilliant stuff. So the Three Amigos.
I presume they've got on height, have they?
They have. I think so, mate. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's definitely height. You could have ended up as Chewbacca, Steve. It could have been worse, mate. I think everyone's happy. Everybody's happy there. So the Three Amigos is back at, of course, 6 o'clock Friday night. And as always, we've go on.
Tomorrow night I've got a new shirt, courtesy of George, and I've got a new hat as well. So they'll make an appearance tomorrow night.
Fantastic.
I'll tell you what I was going to say. I was going to say that for those who were watching, who listened to Stewie's team and heard the name Wayne Quinn and that sort of thinking, who? Well, Wayne Quinn played 15 games for Newcastle and scored none. And I think he's played 22 for West Ham and scored none. So, that's probably why you've never heard of him.
That's a quality left back right there.
Actually, Steve, I was going to say the team that were played at West Ham and we got the 1-1 draw. There was a kid called Harrower playing for us, and even the Newcastle fans didn't know who the hell he was. They just bought him from Liverpool, and I think he lasted about 6 weeks, and he was off to Falkirk. But when he came on Ham, nobody knew who he was. We couldn't even tell the West Ham fans who he was because we didn't know. Harrower, if ever you've heard of that.
I think next week, lads, we just had the question there from Tom Lynch. Who's next week's Retro Show? I think we should do Man United. Is everybody up? Have we done Man United?
Oh, yeah,
okay. Right, let's go for that then. I wanted to do them alphabetically because I'm going to get caught out one week and say, let's do this, and then I'll forget we've done it. But Man United, I know I haven't done that. So Manchester United will be next week's show. We'll let Mitch and Stu get themselves away for their night out. And don't forget, guys, phone a friend if you've got time tonight or tomorrow. Give them a ring. Just call a family member or a friend that you haven't spoken to for a while. And we'll play out, as always, with that video from the ex-players. But lads, from me, George, Steve Hasty and Mitch and Stu, take care, lads. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.